Hello, BookTube. I have a bit of a strange little mishmash of a video for you today. Only one video, I'm afraid. I, months ago, took on an extensive writing and researching project, and it's coming due. So I am being increasingly subsumed in that work, and it's unfortunately not the only deadline that I have for August. I have quite a few deadlines for August. So suddenly it's one of those things where you're not looking, and the work side of your life becomes this gigantic cresting tsunami. When it comes to the large writing and research project, I am in the process right now, as we speak, of doing the impossible. And as the old saying goes, the impossible takes a little time. So I'm afraid it's going to have to be one video, and it's not even a really well-structured video. It's just a reflection of something that's been on my mind lately. A couple of things that have conflated recently in my mind. Of course, I'm thinking about a BookTube event, my poor neglected Book Trek, which was created by Vin at Revenant Reads a couple of years ago. I've been a co-host since the beginning. I am a co-host this year. Book Trek is going on for the rest of August. It's still got 3 more weeks in it. I should be talking about Star Trek every day. It's a BookTube event designed to celebrate Star Trek fiction. But not only initially did I feel a little bit awkward about making literally 15 videos to any one video from any other co-host, but also other things started to crowd out my plate. But that's not a good enough reason to neglect an event that I love so much. So I was thinking about that, about making a lot more Book Trek videos before the end of the month. But I was also thinking about books, because MJ at Reading This Life, about a year ago, she did a thing called the Perfect Book Tag. And it's had a little bit of a renaissance. A few people have been doing it recently that I've been watching. And that tag is, it's all about the 2 different kinds of books. And by this, I don't mean paperback or hardcover or print or e. I mean the 2 different kinds of books. One discussion about books is the delivery vehicle. Whatever that delivery vehicle is, whether it's an audiobook or a full cast audio performance or an ebook or a paperback or a hardcover. One book that's being sort of evoked in that tag is the delivery experience. I think a lot of people mostly concentrate on that. When I did the Perfect Book Tag last year, I mostly concentrated on that. But the other kind of book that comes up often in that tag, and also in our own discussions, is the other kind of book. It's the thing that lives inside the delivery device, if that makes any sense. There's a thing there's a kind of the Christian version of a soul that lives inside the body of a book. There's a book inside your book, right? You already know this because you remember the book separate from the delivery device. You can remember everything about the book without actually remembering what your specific delivery device was. And the book is inside you now. It's part of you. If it's really good or really bad, it starts to move around your mental furniture. It starts to alter the parameters of how you think about the world. It's not the device that does that. It's not the paperback that does that. It's this intangible book that does that. And I was thinking of both those things because I was watching those Perfect Book Tags, and I was also thinking about them in terms of Star Trek because I've been neglecting Book Trek. I've been thinking about books and reading in the world of Star Trek, and here I'm referring only, as usual, to the Roddenberry Star Trek. So the original series, The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise. I'm not talking about New Trek. I often think about books and reading in the world of Star Trek, trying to figure out what it actually is. I mean, Star Trek is Gene Roddenberry's vision of the future. It was very important to him in the midst of the chaos of the 1960s to posit a vision of mankind's future that is good, that is positive, despite all of the drama that might crop up, even despite wars. That it is a future worth aspiring to, a future worth having. Naturally, when you look at something like that, if you're a bookworm, you wonder, well, what about books? What about reading? And it's not always a reassuring picture that we get. The Enterprise, NCC 1701, no bloody A, B, C, or D, does not have a library. It has a library computer. Doesn't have any books. And in Star Trek, pretty much aside from Samuel T. Cogley, attorney at law, pretty much the only person we hear about who enjoys reading is the captain, Captain Kirk. And then you jump forward 75 years to the Next Generation, and again, the only person who ever seems to talk about enjoying the process of reading, whether it's a printed book or not, is the captain, Jean-Luc Picard. But in the Next Generation, something new has been added. Of course, in the Next Generation, you have a lot more of something that was only lightly hinted at in the original series. Roddenberry envisioned one of the many, many aspects of his vision of the future was that it's paperless, that it's an electronic future where books are antiques. And in the Next Generation, that is carried much further. There are handheld devices. There are handheld mechanical devices. This is an old, a 15-year-old Barnes & Noble Nook device with the little hinge down here for a card and the raised Nook power button there and the charging port there, volumes on the side, powers on the other side. A good, sturdy, hefty device. I just use it as a prop. I don't actually use my Barnes & Noble Nook. This was the Color Nook, their version of the iPad. I don't even use this anymore because it's got like 1 gig of storage. There's almost nothing that I can do with this, except read maybe the 2 or 3 books that are on it. But other than that, no. But as a prop, it will do, especially considering the quality of props on this channel is a low bar to clear. We see these all over Star Trek. These were actually inspired by Star Trek. All these devices were inspired by Star Trek. People saw that and thought, let's make that a reality. It turns out to be ubiquitous in our time and also unbelievably useful. Pad technology is unbelievably useful, but it means something different in Star Trek, especially once you get to the Next Generation and this starts to become a substrain, an ecosystem on its own. This is a personal access data device, a PADD. So we think of these as tablets or pads, but in Star Trek they actually do have a name. They are a personal access data device. And they come in all shapes and sizes, and we only get tantalizing glimpses of what they can do. They can access the Library Computer Access and Retrieval System, LCARS, which I guess we would think of as the internet of the 24th century. They can access LCARS, which is, at least for civilians, the vast body of data that exists. So kind of an internet, only, I guess, with no profit motive. Imagine an internet with no profit motive, an internet that is not harvesting information, an internet that is not weighing or biasing search results in any way for any reason. It's probably that. And the device itself is very light, much lighter than this thing. We can see by the way characters handle it. They're very light, and they're very durable. They're a boronite whisper epoxy casing that is very, very durable. You can drop it off a building, and it won't be hurt at all. And they're powered by cerium chrelide power cells that draw power from any nearby compatible system that has power running through it. So if you've got one of these things in the home, your home will be powered. Your home will be near a power source. If you've got one on board a starship, for instance, the starship has its onboard computer system. It will draw power from those. Imagine, in other words, your data pad. Imagine your own handheld device now that has Wi-Fi, only that when it accesses Wi-Fi, the Wi-Fi powers the device. Imagine that. So you're going to be hard-pressed, unless you're an avid trekker in the lower T sense of the word, you're going to be hard-pressed to find a place you could go where you can't charge your device, where your device isn't always drawing power from something. Data pads are mass-produced. There are tons and tons of them. Their capacity is enormous. In one Star Trek episode, we get the clear implication that if you really wanted to, you could pilot a starship using a data pad. They have all sorts of other qualities as well. They have, I wonder if I have a picture. Uh, they have, well, you're going to know already what I'm talking about if you're a Star Trek fan. If you're watching Book Trek, if you're a Star Trek fan. Yeah. They have secondary panels. They have visual displays, secondary panels, all kinds of hard factor subdivisions of the main screen. This is just one example. There are many, many other examples of what they look like. They come in smaller sizes. They come in iPad sizes. And they have all sorts of capacities. I don't think I ever remember an example in Star Trek, in Roddenberry Trek, of a data pad being voice activated. But I'm sure that's not a stretch of the imagination at all. The one thing, though, the one thing that we don't see in Star Trek is people reading on these things. Reading data, sure. Working on these things, but not reading for pleasure. We almost never see anybody reading for pleasure in Star Trek. And if they were, it's only, I guess, a captain's privilege to be reading from a print and paper book. They would be reading from this, from a device like this. But there's almost no reference or even hint that that actually happens. And as if that weren't worrying enough, there is elaborate evocations of an alternative, which is holo novels, where you can program the starship, and I assume a starbase or your home, you can program it with the details of a novel and then live inside that novel. You can participate in a holo novel. And given the preponderance of how many times holo novels are mentioned, I don't think any Star Trek show is ever explicit about this, but I'm under the distinct impression that they have replaced reading as the thing that people do when they want some kind of, I guess, quasi-bookish experience. Look at it almost as a horrifying end product exponent of the increased desire in the 21st century for dumb readers, to identitarian politics readers, to see themselves reflected specifically in the book. Maybe if you follow that to its grim end conclusion, you get holo novels, where you are literally a main character syndrome, that sort of thing. But it got me thinking. I try not to think about the fact that the 23rd century or the 24th century might not be bookish. That's alarming to think about. And I don't know. We don't get much in the way of specifics about data pads. I don't know that there is such a thing. Is there, as a fully updated Star Trek technical manual that might have lots and lots of details about these things? But when I saw that, when I was thinking about that, those devices as they're absolutely, they proliferate throughout later Roddenberry Star Trek, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, especially Voyager. Also, they're everywhere when it comes to things like when it comes to those shows. They're everywhere. Characters have them all the time in all kinds of capacities. And partly I've allayed my worries about the bookish future by reminding myself that, you know, Starfleet vessels are quasi-military, and what we're seeing when we see people using these things in Star Trek episodes, they're essentially at work. So maybe that is the main function of data pads. I don't know, but it got me thinking in connection with the perfect book tag about what I would do, about if I could make a perfect book, what would it be? It of course would not be, no offense to all of you out there, no offense to the younger me, it of course would not be paper and print. Making and shipping and mass manufacturing and deploying any kind of ink technology is horrible for the environment. We only have the one environment. Creating the paper is incredibly harmful for the environment. Moving the trucks from the paper refining plant to the ink refining plant to the printing press to the warehouses to the bookstores, moving those planes and trucks is incredibly harmful to the environment. It's incredibly costly and wasteful in a way that electronic books are not. They have their own wastages, but their wastages are a lot more easy. It's a lot easier to zero in on the wastage of electronic reading and reduce it or eliminate it than it is the gigantic, archaic process of getting a print book out into the world. So when I think about the perfect book, I think, of course, electronic. I think about an electronic book. But these aren't it. I'm not mean to be brandishing this, because this, of course, isn't it. This is literally an example of the march of progress, of technological development, because no one could. I mean, maybe I shouldn't say no one, because probably one of you does use your old Note still as an active device. But this is an unbelievably limited device. Even if you open this little door at the bottom and put in a card that has as much memory storage as possible, it's still an unbelievably limited device. So I mainly had it at hand because I was wondering if it still worked. I had it out because I was wondering if it still worked. I would never use it. But it'll do just fine because its raw parameters are right. You can hold this in one hand, and it is nice and sturdy. So that's a starting point. It's not Boronite Whisper epoxy, and it's several different moving parts and materials, which I would not use. If I'm making a perfect device like this, it would weigh very little, and it would all be one material. That's cool. Did I do that? Well, anyway, it would all be one material, and the material would be really, really tough, and the section of the material that is the front-facing panel of the device would just be thinner, so that I could read through it. But it would be uniform durability. If I were to throw this thing across the room, this casing would not be hurt at all. But this is glass; that would be cracked if I did that. I could still use the device, but it would be a lot less convenient. Same thing with this is an iPad Mini in a case. I had to put a rubber and plastic case over this thing. If I were to throw this thing across the room, probably, the case would not be scratched at all, and maybe the contours of the case, see that's beveled just a little, might protect the screen, but maybe not. The screen might be cracked because it's Gorilla Glass, which is tough. It's tougher than this, but it's not tough enough. I would want it all to be one case. One. It doesn't have to be boronite. I have no idea what planet boronite is mined on, but one thing where the sides are the same material as the front, only the front is thin enough so that you can project stuff through it. But you can't scratch it. You don't have to worry about it. It's not fragile. You don't have to worry about sitting on it or having a fat bastard sit on it. And I would add features from there. I would definitely have... what is that? Oh, I'm sorry. You'd think that if I'm only making the one video today, that I would have taken pains to make it seem not a little less haphazard, but no. Instead, the light here is just going crazy. There are all sorts of features that I would want it to have. One feature that pads have in Star Trek that I would very much like is a pop-up holographic display. Some of them have that, where you can put the thing flat on a surface and just have a hologram come up. If you want to look at a world or a piece of topography or hear a person speak, give a lecture, or clarify a point, or something like that, I would have an optional voice interaction, so that when I pick up the device, I can say, computer. I can tell it to turn on, and along those lines, that would also facilitate audio. And one of the commands that I would like to be able to give it, would be to silo what it does. So, I would be able to say on, and then I would be able to say reading mode, so that I have a dedicated reading experience without all the bells and whistles pulling at me, without anything like that, where I would have to go out of reading mode and into, I don't know, LCARS mode or whatever, in order to use it for something else. But I would still be able to use it for something else. So in primitive 21st century terms, I would be able to, with a voice or, manually, I would be able to, like, for instance, in one of these panels down here, maybe would be the way that I would do it, I would be able to customize what kind of a device experience I want. I would be able to say on, reading mode, and then quickly decide, do I want e-ink? Do I want backlit screen? What kind of font do I want? What kind of page arrangement do I want? I'd be able to customize my covers. I'd be able to customize the whole thing. And also, all of the books would be linked to each other. because in this fantasy world that I'm thinking about, books in the 23rd century, uh, we would have found another way to pay authors. We would have found a better, more equitable way to pay authors. So once a book went out into the world, it would well and truly be out in the world. You would still be the author. Someone would still be in a lot of trouble if they claimed that work as their own when it wasn't. But your book would be free. And in both senses of the word, it would have no cost and it would have no limitations on its movement. You, as an author, would be compensated in some other way. Again, we don't know anything. We know tantalizingly little about that when it comes to the future. We know that books and literacy are multiplanetary. We know that in the original series. In the great episode City on the Edge of Forever, Captain Kirk tells Edith Keeler that on a planet circling a star in the belt of Orion lives an author who a few centuries from now is going to write a classic based around the three most important words of all, let me help, which he ranks even higher than I love you. We never know anything about that author. Is that author human? We certainly don't know anything about the method of the book production. But it's tantalizing because we almost never get that. We almost never get 23rd or 24th century characters talking about books that haven't yet been written in our own time. That almost never happens. It's, I think, the only time that Kirk does it. Other than that, he's constantly quoting from 20th or 19th century verse and poetry, verse and prose. So that's one of the only examples that we get. But we get a tantalizing moment in Star Trek Voyager, the final episode of Star Trek Voyager, when we learn that Tom Paris has been writing holo novels. So holo novels have authors, and those authors are allowed to, they're able to make a living. We don't know anything about it, but I would like to think in my perfect book, the book itself would be free. And it would be connected to every other book automatically. You wouldn't have to log out of the book experience and log in somewhere else. You would be able to either verbally, I would like it if it was verbally, but or type in a kind of a mega search function where you're reading through a book about I don't even know the history of Denobula, and you or the career of the captain of the Enterprise C. If you were reading a book about the career of the captain of the Enterprise C, and you want to know what other authors have said on a certain point, here is a dispute. Here is a what seems like a partial or classified reference to a major adventure that this character had when she was still a cadet at the academy. What do all other authors about this character say about that incident? You could just ask this mythical book device that I'm thinking about, and it would find all of those things. And it wouldn't find those things and then present you with the option to buy. It would instead tell you those things because the books would be free. The authors would already be compensated somehow, probably in the way that we should compensate authors even now, rather than the way we don't, if that makes any sense. So the device that I'm thinking about would be all but indestructible. And it would have a whole bunch of different modes. If I wanted to work on it, sure. If I wanted to do crew manifests or mathematical equations, which is a lot of what we see on datapads, the few times we see them, I could do that, sure. But I could also read on it. And if I were reading on it, it would be a whole universe of functionality that doesn't exist now. Probably right now, the most functional reading device that I have is this iPad mini or my full-size iPad, where it's very cumbersome compared to the device that I'm thinking about. But I can read on this thing. If I've got my wallet with me, I can certainly access a whole bunch of new books. Thanks to things like Project Gutenberg, I can access a gigantic array of older books. I can't do it instantly. There are many steps involved to get it where I want it to be, to make it so that it's there and it's readable and it's formatted correctly. And through this device, provided I am around Wi-Fi, I can also access other things. I can access the outside world. I can access the library computer access and retrieval system of the 21st century in a limited way. in a very limited way, I can do that. I can't customize this device in many other ways. I can't tell, like this is an iPad, for instance, so it's backlit. I can't tell it not to be. I have some adjustability on these things, and a couple of my e-readers, I have some adjustability in terms of the warmth of the light or type of light, but not much. Not much. They're as primitive as they look. This is a primitive version of this, and I would like a version of this. I kept thinking about that while I was thinking about my poor neglected book trek. I was thinking, boy, oh boy, the reading tech that we have now, it evolves, of course, slowly. It's driven by the market, but it evolves slowly. If you watch as many tech channels as I do, you know that. There's huge strides that are being made, for instance, in color e-ink that is better and better all the time with every device. Literally, with every device that comes to market, it's better. And that will be less of a strain on your eyes, and it's getting more and more vibrant, sharper and sharper. The resolution, the screen resolutions are, in terms of pixels per inch, are getting better and better. There's all sorts of, the iPad Mini 6, for instance, this is the iPad Mini 4. The iPad Mini 6 puts this to shame, but we have a long way to go. We have a long way to go. And again, when I talk about having a long way to go, I'm referring to both books. Both the books that are evoked in the Perfect Book tag. The device, which is inextricably linked with how we think about books. And the book, the ghost that lives inside the book, the text itself, in the Stanley Fish sense of the term, the small t text of the book itself. How do we manipulate that? How can we manipulate that? Who does it belong to? And how can it be enhanced? I've been thinking about that in terms of book trek, mainly in lieu of doing a book trek book video, because I'm gonna have to add Star Trek to my reading at night once I get my reading at night back from the huge task that I am doing. So anyway, just some random thoughts on a perfect book, on both perfect books. Customizing the text, having a lightweight, basically indestructible, sort of pretty device that can do everything, that can do absolutely everything. Does such a thing exist in the 23rd century or the 24th century? I don't know. I don't know. We don't get enough information about it in canonical Star Trek. So maybe I'll just have to write a story of my own. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up for now. I don't know what this video was. Just a thought about Star Trek and books. That's all. I would love to know, of course. I love this conversation just in general. I just can't guarantee that I'll be able to respond to comments, which I like to do. But I'd love to know if you were building the perfect book, if it weren't paper and print, if it were electronic in some way, what would it be? Am I speaking alone here, or would you also like an absolutely perfected combination of iPad and Kindle? Some device that's, you don't have to worry about bending it or breaking it. You don't have to worry about, most of these things, the Kindle readers, you don't have to worry about submerging in water anymore. You have to worry about a whole bunch of other things. And you're constantly having to charge them. Whereas the device that I'm talking about, it charges itself. Imagine if Wi-Fi charged your device. Instead of just connecting it to LCARS, imagine if it charged your device. Do you ever daydream about something like that, I guess, is my question. But I don't know if I'd be able to answer the comments. So feel free to make them anyway. I will get to them eventually. I just keep telling myself, I will get out of this. This will resolve itself. I almost want to say it will resolve itself one way or another, but that's not possible. I haven't gone this long, 28 years, on one way or another. One way or another is a euphemistic way of saying I may just fail. And I haven't gone 28 years with there not being one way or the other. There's only one way. This has to happen. It's just going to decrease my booktube, that's all, and a bunch of other things too. But eventually, it will happen. Eventually, I will be through this, and I will celebrate. So I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.